Arizona Territory, 1887. The unforgiving summer sun beat down on Xavier Steele's weathered face as he tracked a wounded coyote through the painted canyons. The beast had been raiding his chicken coop for weeks, and Xavier wasn't a man who suffered thieves, not the four-legged kind, nor the two-legged variety that occasionally drifted through these parts. He hadn't planned on venturing this deep into Apache territory. The uneasy peace between settlers and the remaining free bands was tenuous at best, especially after the surrender of Geronimo the previous year. As a man who preferred solitude to the politics of town or reservation, Xavier kept to his modest ranch and minded his own business. The distant sound of children's cries stopped him cold. Xavier dismounted, tethered his paint horse to a scrub oak, and crept forward. Below, in a narrow ravine, two young Apache girls, neither older than 10, huddled together on a narrow ledge halfway down the rock face. A mountain lion paced at the bottom, occasionally leaping upward with desperate hunger in its eyes. Xavier didn't hesitate. He drew his Winchester rifle and took careful aim. The big cat was dangerously close to reaching the children with its next jump. His fingers squeezed the trigger, the shot echoing through the canyon. The mountain lion tumbled to the ground, and the girls screamed in terror. "It's all right," Xavier called out, though he knew they likely didn't understand English. He holstered his rifle and raised his hands to show he meant no harm. The older girl's eyes were fierce with suspicion, while the younger one simply trembled. Getting them down wouldn't be easy. The ledge they'd managed to reach was at least 15 feet above the canyon floor, with no obvious path down. Xavier removed his bandana and wiped the sweat from his forehead, considering his options. "Stay there," he called, pointing firmly at the ledge. "Stay? I will help." He mimed climbing and reaching for them. The older girl nodded slowly, her dark eyes never leaving him. Xavier fashioned a makeshift harness from his lariat, creating a loop seat that he could lower and raise. It took nearly an hour to get both girls safely down, the younger one first, then the older, who had refused to go before her sister. Once on solid ground, the younger girl collapsed against Xavier's leg, overcome with exhaustion. The older one stood warily nearby, her gaze alternating between Xavier and the dead mountain lion. "My name is Xavier," he said, pointing to himself. "Xavier Steele." The older girl spoke a few words in Apache that he couldn't understand. Then, in halting English, she said, "I am Lily. She is Dolly." She pointed to her sister. "Thank you." Xavier nodded, relieved at the small bridge of communication. "You are far from home." Lily nodded. "We follow Butterfly. Too far. Mountain lion come." Xavier looked toward the horizon. The sun was beginning its descent, and nightfall would make it dangerous to travel. "I take you home tomorrow," he said. "Tonight, you stay at my ranch. Safe." The decision to bring two Apache children to his home wasn't one Xavier took lightly. Relations between whites and Indians remained strained, and he could be accused of kidnapping. But leaving them here, or trying to find their people before dark, posed greater dangers. When they arrived at his modest ranch house, Xavier felt strangely self-conscious of his bachelor accommodations. The cabin was clean but sparse, a table, 2 chairs, a cook stove, and a narrow bed. He quickly arranged blankets on the floor near the hearth for the girls and prepared a simple meal of beans, dried beef, and biscuits. As the girls ate hungrily, Xavier wondered about their family, whether they were being searched for, and what consequences might come from his good deed. The Apache were known to be fiercely protective of their children, and a white man taking them, even to help, might not be viewed favorably. That night, as the girls slept by the dying embers of the fire, Xavier sat in his chair by the window, rifle across his lap. He would return them at first light, hoping their people would understand his intentions. But sleep eluded him as his thoughts drifted to another life, another time. Before the war, before the loss that had driven him west. He'd once imagined a home filled with children's laughter, a wife's warm smile greeting him each evening. Instead, he'd found solitude in this harsh, beautiful land. Dawn broke with a crimson slash across the eastern sky. Xavier had just finished preparing a breakfast of cornmeal mush when he heard the approach of horses, many horses. He moved to the window, rifle ready. Outside, a group of mounted Apache warriors formed a semicircle around his cabin. At their center rode a woman on a magnificent black Mustang, her long hair adorned with beads and feathers, her bearing regal despite her simple dress. Xavier stepped onto his porch, hands visible. "I mean no harm," he called out. "The children are safe." As if on cue, the cabin door swung open behind him, and the girls rushed past. "Mother!" they cried in unison, running toward the woman on the black horse. The woman dismounted in one fluid motion and embraced her daughters, her eyes never leaving Xavier. After a brief exchange in Apache, she stood tall and approached the porch. "I am Rising Moon," she said in clear English that surprised Xavier. "You saved my daughters." Xavier nodded. "They were trapped by a mountain lion. I only did what anyone would do." Rising Moon's dark eyes studied him. "Not anyone," she corrected. "Not in these times." She was striking, not just in her beauty, which was considerable, but in her presence. Xavier guessed she was in her early 30s, with a dignity that suggested importance within her tribe. The warriors behind her maintained their positions, hands near weapons, faces impassive. "I brought them here for safety," Xavier explained. "I plan to return them this morning." Rising Moon nodded. "Lilui told me." She turned and spoke to the warriors, who visibly relaxed at her words. "We will go now, but I will return tomorrow. I bring payment for the lives of my children." Before Xavier could protest that no payment was necessary, Rising Moon had mounted her horse. With a final nod of acknowledgement, she led her daughters and the warriors away, leaving Xavier standing alone on his porch, wondering what tomorrow might bring. The next day dawned clear and cool, a welcome respite from the summer heat. Xavier found himself unusually attentive to his appearance as he waited, trimming his beard and donning a clean shirt. He told himself it was a matter of respect, nothing more. Mid-morning, a single rider appeared on the horizon. As the figure drew closer, Xavier recognized Rising Moon, alone this time, leading a pack horse laden with bundles. She dismounted with the same grace she had shown the day before, her expression solemn. "Xavier Steele," she said, "I have come to honor your courage and kindness." Xavier stepped forward to help with the pack horse. "There's no need for payment, Rising Moon. I'm just glad the girls are safe." "This is our way," she replied firmly. "To refuse would dishonor us both." Xavier nodded, understanding the importance of respecting her customs. He helped unload the pack horse, carrying the bundles to his porch. There were beautiful hand-woven blankets, cured deerskins, and pouches of medicinal herbs. Rising Moon hesitated before handing him the final bundle, smaller than the rest and wrapped in soft leather. "This is the true payment," she said. "It is sacred to my people. A gift of life for a gift of life." Xavier carefully unwrapped the bundle to reveal a small, intricately carved wooden box. Inside lay a medallion crafted from silver and turquoise, suspended on a leather cord. "This has been in my family for generations," Rising Moon explained. "It is said to guide its owner to their true destiny." Xavier felt the weight of the gift, not just the physical object, but the meaning behind it. "I cannot accept something so valuable," he protested gently. Rising Moon's expression remained resolute. "You must. It has chosen you." She took the medallion and placed it around his neck herself. "My people have a saying. When you save a life, you become responsible for it. You are now connected to my family, Xavier Steele." The medallion felt warm against his skin, as if it carried its own life force. Xavier was not a superstitious man, but something about this gift, and the woman who bestowed it, stirred emotions long dormant within him. "Will you share a meal before you return?" he asked, surprising himself with the invitation. Rising Moon studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I would be honored." As Xavier prepared a simple lunch, he found himself sharing stories of his life, his childhood in Pennsylvania, his service in the Union Army, his journey west after the war. Rising Moon listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed her intelligence and curiosity. In turn, she told him of her people's struggles in recent years, the difficult choices between resistance and survival. Xavier learned she was a widow, her husband killed during a cavalry attack 3 years prior. As the daughter of a respected medicine man, she held a position of influence within her band, which had managed to avoid reservation life by retreating deep into the mountains. "How did you learn English so well?" Xavier asked as they finished their meal. A shadow passed across Rising Moon's face. "I was taken to a mission school as a child," she said. I was there for 5 years before I escaped and found my way back to my people. Xavier nodded, understanding the unspoken pain behind her words. The government's policies of educating Indian children were well known for their cruelty and attempt to erase native cultures. Your daughters are fortunate to have you, he said sincerely. Rising Moon's expression softened. And I am fortunate to still have them, thanks to you. She looked toward the window, noting the sun's position. I must return before dark. Xavier walked her to her horse, suddenly reluctant to see her go. Will I see you again? He asked, the question escaping before he could consider its implications. Rising Moon mounted her horse, looking down at him with an unreadable expression. The medallion will answer that question, Xavier Steele. She gathered the reins of the pack horse. Listen to what it tells you. With that cryptic response, she rode away, leaving Xavier standing in his yard, one hand unconsciously touching the silver and turquoise against his chest, wondering what strange reward had truly been bestowed upon him. That night, Xavier dreamed of Rising Moon, not as he had seen her, but dressed in white buckskin, singing beside a river that flowed with starlight instead of water. In the dream, she beckoned to him, but when he tried to reach her, the medallion grew heavy, pulling him in another direction. He awoke before dawn, the medallion warm against his skin. Outside his window, a coyote howled, a lone, mournful sound that seemed to echo his own solitude. For days, Xavier went about his ranch work, trying to push thoughts of Rising Moon from his mind. Yet the medallion seemed to pulse with warmth at odd moments, particularly when he faced the distant mountains where her people made their home. A week after her visit, Xavier rode into the town of Copper Springs for supplies. The small settlement had grown in recent years with the discovery of copper deposits in the surrounding hills. As he tied his horse outside the general store, he overheard a conversation that chilled him. Army's planning a sweep through the northern canyons, said a man Xavier recognized as a prospector. Heard they're rounding up the last of the hostiles, moving them to San Carlos. About time, replied the store owner. Can't have savages roaming free, scaring off investors. Xavier entered the store, nodding curtly to the men. As he gathered his supplies, his mind raced. The northern canyons were precisely where Rising Moon had indicated her band was camped. If the army was planning an operation there, when's this sweep happening? Xavier asked casually as he paid for his goods. The store owner shrugged. Soon, from what I hear. Lieutenant Garrison was in yesterday, buying up half my tobacco stock. Said they might be out on patrol for weeks. Xavier loaded his supplies quickly and headed not toward his ranch, but to the small army outpost on the edge of town. He had served with distinction during the war. Perhaps that would grant him enough credibility to learn more. At the outpost, he found Lieutenant James Garrison, a young officer with an eager face and immaculate uniform that marked him as new to frontier duty. Mr. Steele, the lieutenant greeted him after Xavier introduced himself. What brings you to our humble post? Heard talk of an operation in the northern canyons, Xavier said directly. Wanted to know if I should be concerned for my property. His ranch lay to the east, not north, but the lieutenant wouldn't know that. Garrison hesitated, then seemed to decide that sharing generally known plans posed no risk. Nothing for civilians to worry about. Simply a relocation effort for some unregistered Apache bands. Standard procedure, all very humane. His rehearsed words carried the hollow ring of official policy rather than ground truth. When does this relocation begin? Xavier pressed. 3 days' time, Garrison replied. But I assure you, Mr. Steele, we're professionals. There won't be any unpleasantness. Xavier had seen enough relocations to know what that meant. Families ripped from their homes, forced marches to reservations where disease and starvation awaited. He thanked the lieutenant and left, his decision already made. The medallion seemed to pulse against his chest as he rode, not toward his ranch, but north, toward the canyons. He knew the risk he was taking. Warning an Apache band about army movements could be considered treason. At minimum, he would be labeled an Indian sympathizer, which in these parts was sometimes a death sentence itself. Yet he rode on, the image of Rising Moon and her daughters driving him forward. Finding her band proved more difficult than Xavier had anticipated. The Apache were masters of concealment, and even his tracking skills were tested as he searched the maze of canyons for signs of their camp. On the second day, as dusk approached, The medallion grew noticeably warmer. Xavier followed this strange guidance, turning his horse into a narrow ravine he might otherwise have bypassed. There, he found himself surrounded by Apache warriors who seemed to materialize from the very rocks. "I seek Rising Moon," he said, raising his hands to show he was no threat. "I bring important news." The warriors exchanged glances, their expressions suspicious. Finally, one nodded and gestured for Xavier to follow. They led him through passages so narrow he had to dismount and lead his horse, eventually emerging into a hidden valley where a small encampment of perhaps 20 lodges stood. Children stopped their play to stare at the white stranger. Women paused in their work, some retreating into lodges, others reaching for weapons. Xavier kept his hands visible and his movements slow. Rising Moon emerged from a large lodge at the center of the camp, her face registering surprise before she schooled her features into a dignified mask. "Xavier Steele," she said, approaching him. "Why do you come to us?" "Danger approaches," he replied without preamble. "The army plans to sweep these canyons in 3 days. They intend to relocate your people to San Carlos." A murmur ran through the gathering crowd as someone translated his words. Rising Moon's expression remained calm, but Xavier saw the concern in her eyes. "Come," she said, gesturing toward her lodge. "We must speak of this." Inside the lodge, away from the anxious eyes of her people, Rising Moon's composure faltered. "San Carlos is a place of death for us," she said quietly. "The fever took many of our relatives there last winter." "That's why I came," Xavier replied. "Your people need to move, quickly and without leaving tracks." Rising Moon studied him. "Why do you risk yourself for us, Xavier Steele? You could lose everything, your ranch, your freedom, perhaps your life." Xavier's hand moved to the medallion. "I told myself it was because of the children, because no one deserves to be forced from their home." He met her gaze. "But the truth is, I couldn't bear the thought of harm coming to you." Something shifted in Rising Moon's expression, surprise, followed by a softness Xavier hadn't seen before. "The medallion," she said. "It brought you to us. Is that its purpose?" Xavier asked. "To guide me here?" Rising Moon moved closer. "Its purpose is to guide the heart to where it truly belongs." She placed her hand over his, both of them now touching the medallion. "I did not tell you the full truth about this gift, Xavier Steele." The warmth of her hand seemed to flow through him, and Xavier found himself struggling to focus on the danger rather than her proximity. "What truth?" "This medallion has been passed down through the women in my family for generations," she explained. "It is given only to the man who is destined to be our protector and partner. My grandmother gave it to my grandfather, my mother to my father, and now—" The implication of her words hung in the air between them. Xavier felt a surge of emotions, confusion, hope, fear. "Rising Moon, I'm a white man. Your people would never accept. My people respect strength, honor, and courage," she interrupted. "You have shown all three." She took a deep breath. "But now is not the time for such discussions. My people are in danger. What do you suggest we do?" Xavier reluctantly focused on the immediate threat. "There's a valley beyond the eastern ridge, near my property. It's hidden, with good water and hunting. You could shelter there while the army searches these canyons." Rising Moon considered this. "And after? The soldiers will keep searching." "I have contacts in Colorado," Xavier said. "People who help Indians escape to safer territories. Once the immediate danger passes, I can reach out to them." Rising Moon nodded slowly. "I will speak with the elders. This is not a decision I can make alone." Outside, the camp was already in motion, people packing essentials, dousing fires. Rising Moon emerged from the lodge with Xavier and called for the elders to gather. Xavier stood aside, aware of the suspicious glances cast his way. The discussion was held in Apache, with Rising Moon occasionally translating key points for Xavier. Some elders argued for standing their ground, others for splitting the band to confuse pursuers. Rising Moon advocated for Xavier's plan, her voice calm but authoritative. Finally, the eldest of the council, a wizened man with cloudy eyes, spoke at length. When he finished, the other elders nodded in agreement. "They have decided to accept your help," Rising Moon told Xavier. "We will leave at dawn." That night, as the camp prepared for evacuation, Xavier helped where he could, conscious of earning trust through actions rather than words. He repaired a travois, assisted in packing supplies, and advised on covering their trail. Late in the night, he found Rising Moon outside her lodge, gazing at the stars. "Your people work well together," he observed. "They'll be ready by dawn." "We have had much practice at leaving our homes," she replied, a hint of bitterness in her voice. Xavier stood beside her, following her gaze to the stars. "I'm sorry for all of it. You are not responsible for the actions of all white men," Rising Moon said. "No, but I've been silent too long," Xavier admitted. Watching injustice and doing nothing to stop it, Rising Moon turned to face him. In the starlight, her features seemed both vulnerable and strong. "You are not silent now," she said softly. "You risk everything for people not your own." Xavier found himself drawing closer to her. "Perhaps they could be my own," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Rising Moon's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, Xavier feared he had overstepped. Then she reached up and touched the medallion resting against his chest. "The elders say you were the soul of an Apache warrior," she said. "They see how the medallion has chosen you." Before Xavier could respond, a watchman's call alerted them to movement on the canyon rim. Everyone froze, expecting soldiers, but it was only a deer passing by. Still, the moment of tension reminded them of the danger at hand. "Try to rest," Rising Moon said, stepping away from him. "Tomorrow will test us all." Xavier returned to the small space at the edge of camp where he had been permitted to spread his bedroll. Sleep eluded him as his mind raced between practical concerns about the evacuation and deeper questions about his feelings for Rising Moon and what future, if any, they could possibly share. Dawn broke with a heavy mist clinging to the canyon floor, a stroke of luck that would help conceal their movement. The band moved with practiced efficiency, leaving minimal evidence of their encampment. Xavier led them through little-known passages, avoiding the main trails where army scouts might be posted. By midday, they had covered half the distance to the valley Xavier had suggested. They paused briefly to rest the elderly and children, eating cold rations to avoid smoke that might give away their position. During the rest, Liliui and Dolly found Xavier where he was scouting the path ahead. They approached shyly, then Dolly presented him with a small leather pouch. "For protection," she explained in her limited English, mimicking shooting with a bow. Xavier accepted the gift with appropriate solemnity. Inside the pouch were small stones and what appeared to be an eagle feather, a child's talismans of safety. "Thank you," he said, securing the pouch to his belt. "This will keep us all safe." Liliui, the more serious of the two, studied him with eyes remarkably like her mother's. "You love our mother," she stated with the direct perception of childhood. Xavier felt heat rise in his face, glancing around to ensure Rising Moon wasn't within earshot. "I respect her greatly," he hedged. Liliu was not deceived. "It is good," she decided. "She is lonely since father died. You are brave. You can protect us." Before Xavier could formulate a response to this childish matchmaking, Rising Moon called for everyone to continue moving. The girls ran off to join their people, leaving Xavier both discomfited and strangely hopeful. The afternoon brought their first real challenge. As they crossed an exposed stretch between canyons, a dust cloud in the distance signaled riders approaching from the south. Army scouts, Xavier confirmed after studying them through his field glasses. At least 6 men. Rising Moon quickly organized her people into smaller groups, sending them to whatever cover was available: shallow caves, brush thickets, rock outcroppings. "What will you do?" she asked Xavier. "If they find us, it would be better if you were not here." Xavier shook his head. "I made my choice when I warned you. I'm not turning back now." The scouts rode closer, following the very path the Apache band had been using. Discovery seemed inevitable until Xavier made a split-second decision. "Stay hidden," he told Rising Moon. "No matter what happens." Before she could protest, Xavier was running toward his horse, mounted and riding directly toward the army scouts, but at an angle that would intersect their path well away from where the Apache were hiding. As he'd hoped, the scouts spotted him and changed course to intercept. Xavier recognized Lieutenant Garrison leading the patrol. "Mr. Steele," Garrison called as they drew near. "What brings you out here?" "This area isn't safe." Xavier forced a casual smile. "Hunting, Lieutenant. Found a mountain lion track that I've been following since dawn." Garrison frowned. "You're a long way from your ranch, sir. And heading north, not east." Cat's leading me on a merry chase, Xavier replied with a shrug. What brings the army out? Your operation wasn't supposed to start until tomorrow, by my understanding. Garrison's eyes narrowed slightly. Advanced reconnaissance. Standard procedure. He studied Xavier more carefully. You seem very well informed about army movements, Mr. Steele. Xavier maintained his easy demeanor despite the suspicion in the lieutenant's tone. Small town, Lieutenant. People talk. One of the scouts leaned toward Garrison and whispered something. The lieutenant nodded, then addressed Xavier again. We've been tracking sign all morning. Quite a large group passed this way recently. His gaze was challenging now. You wouldn't happen to have seen any Indians during your hunt, would you? Xavier met his gaze steadily. Can't say that I have. But if I were looking for Apache, I'd head west toward Diamondback Ridge. Saw smoke from that direction yesterday. It was a deliberate misdirection, sending them away from both the hidden band and the eastern valley that was their destination. Garrison studied him a moment longer, clearly suspicious, but without proof of any wrongdoing. We'll check it out, he finally said. You should return to your ranch, Mr. Steele. When we begin operations tomorrow, this entire area will be restricted. Xavier tipped his hat. Appreciate the warning, Lieutenant. Think I'll finish tracking this cat first, though. As the scouts rode west, following his false lead, Xavier circled back to where the Apache were hidden. They're gone, he announced, but they'll realize they've been misled by nightfall. We need to reach the valley before then. Rising Moon emerged from behind a rock formation, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. That was dangerous, Xavier Steele. The soldier suspects you. Let him suspect, Xavier replied. Without proof, there's little he can do. He didn't mention that Garrison could easily return with more men and arrest him on general principles. In the territories, military justice was often summary at best. They pushed on, reaching the hidden valley as the last light faded from the sky. Xavier led them to a defensible position near a spring, where limestone caves offered shelter and lookout points provided early warning of approach. As the band settled in for the night, Rising Moon found Xavier checking the perimeter one final time. You should return to your ranch, she said quietly. The lieutenant saw your face. If you are found with us. Xavier shook his head. I'm exactly where I need to be. He turned to face her fully. Rising Moon, there's something I need to ask you. She waited, her face illuminated by the rising moon that was her namesake. This medallion, he said, touching the silver and turquoise at his throat. You said it's given to the man destined to be your protector and partner. Did you believe that when you gave it to me, or was it simply a traditional payment for saving your children? Rising Moon's expression softened. When my daughters told me how you risked yourself to save them, I knew you were a man of honor. When I met you, I felt. She paused, seeming to search for the right words. I felt the spirits of my ancestors urging me to give you the medallion. I did not understand why then. She stepped closer. Now I understand. The medallion does not create destiny, Xavier Steele. It reveals it. Xavier reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. When she didn't, he gently took her hand. Among my people, when a man cares deeply for a woman, he asks for her hand in marriage, he said. Is it the same among yours? Rising Moon's eyes widened. You would take an Apache wife? Face the scorn of your people. I would take you as my wife, Xavier clarified. And I've never much cared for the opinion of people who judge by the color of skin rather than the quality of character. For the first time, he saw a rising moon truly smile, a transformation so radiant it took his breath away. Among my people, she said, when a woman wishes to accept a man as her husband, she does this. Rising Moon closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with shared emotion. Xavier's arms encircled her, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which, he was rapidly concluding, she was. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I take that as a yes, he murmured. Rising Moon laughed softly. Yes, Xavier Steele. But our path will not be an easy one. Few worthwhile paths are, he replied. Their moment was interrupted by a child's call. Liliui stood watching them, her expression both knowing and pleased. Mother, she said in Apache, the elders wish to speak with you and the white man. Rising Moon sighed. stepping back from Xavier's embrace but keeping hold of his hand. "Come," she said. "We must face the first of many challenges together." The elders had gathered in the largest of the caves. They sat in a semicircle, their faces grave in the light of a small, smokeless fire. Xavier and Rising Moon sat opposite them, still hand in hand, a gesture not lost on the observant elders. The oldest among them, the man with cloudy eyes whom Xavier now knew was called Seeing Beyond, spoke first. Rising Moon translated his words. "He says you have proven yourself a friend to our people," she said. "But friendship with white men has often meant destruction for the Apache." Xavier listened respectfully as each elder spoke in turn, their concerns ranging from practical matters of survival to deeper worries about the future of their traditions. When they finished, Rising Moon nodded to Xavier, indicating it was time for his response. Xavier stood, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. "Tell them that I understand their fears," he began. "White men have broken promises to their people many times before." As Rising Moon translated, Xavier continued, "I cannot undo those wrongs. I can only offer my own promise, that I will protect your people as if they were my own, because through Rising Moon and her daughters, I hope they will become my family." This declaration caused a stir among the elders. One woman, whose silver hair was braided with colorful beads, asked a pointed question that made Rising Moon hesitate before translating. "She asks if you understand what it means to take an Apache wife," Rising Moon explained. "Not just the joining of our bodies, but the joining of our spirits, our peoples." Xavier nodded solemnly. "I understand that I have much to learn about your ways. I ask for the chance to prove myself worthy of Rising Moon and of her people's trust." The discussion continued long into the night, with questions about practical matters. Where would they live? How would they survive? What of the children? Xavier outlined a plan that had been forming in his mind since he'd first recognized his feelings for Rising Moon. His ranch was remote enough to offer safety while being close enough to trade with friendly settlements. The valley where they now sheltered could serve as a refuge during times of heightened army activity. Over time, with the help of his contacts in Colorado, families could decide whether to remain or move further from army influence. When he finished, the elders conferred among themselves. Finally, Seeing Beyond spoke at length, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Rising Moon listened intently, then turned to Xavier with shining eyes. "He says that in the old days, a man seeking to marry would have to prove his hunting skills and bring gifts to the family. But you have already proven your bravery and given the greatest gift, our lives." She squeezed his hand. "The elders give their blessing, but with conditions." "Name them," Xavier said without hesitation. "You must learn our language and customs. You must help protect our traditions so they are not lost. And," Rising Moon smiled, "you must accept that my daughters will test your patience daily, as they do mine." Xavier laughed, relief and joy filling him. "Gladly to all three." The council ended with Seeing Beyond performing a brief ceremony, binding Xavier and Rising Moon's hands together with a woven cord while chanting a prayer. Though not a formal marriage by either Apache or white standards, it was an acceptance and blessing that meant more to Xavier than any legal document could have. As the others retired to rest, Xavier and Rising Moon walked together under the stars, now officially betrothed by Apache custom. "Tomorrow I should return to my ranch," Xavier said. "Not to stay," he added quickly, seeing her expression change, "but to gather supplies and create a false trail. The army will come looking for me when they realize I've helped you." Rising Moon nodded. "And when you return, we'll begin our life together," Xavier said. "It won't be easy. There will be those who hate us for what we are to each other." "There have always been those who hated my people simply for existing," Rising Moon replied. "At least now, we face the hatred with love to strengthen us." Xavier drew her close, sealing their promise with another kiss. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The cowboy who had saved 2 Apache girls and found his heart, and the woman who had arrived with a strange reward that turned out to be the greatest gift of all. True to his word, Xavier returned to his ranch the next day. He gathered essential supplies, buried valuables that couldn't be carried, and left obvious signs of hasty departure that pointed south, away from the hidden valley. When Lieutenant Garrison inevitably came looking for the Indian sympathizer, he would find a cold trail leading nowhere. 2 days later, Xavier returned to the valley with pack horses laden with provisions. Rising Moon greeted him with a warmth that made the dangers he'd faced worthwhile. Over the following weeks, the small band adapted to their new refuge. Xavier began learning Apache, while Rising Moon helped her people understand the strange ways of her future husband. Liliui and Doli appointed themselves Xavier's personal guides to Apache culture. Their initial wariness transformed into enthusiastic acceptance. A month after the army sweep operation ended in failure, Xavier and Rising Moon were properly married in a ceremony that honored both their traditions. Xavier wore the medallion proudly as Seeing Beyond blessed their union under the open sky, followed by a simple exchange of vows that Xavier had learned to speak in halting Apache. Later that year, they established a new home on Xavier's ranch, modified to accommodate extended family groups in the Apache tradition. The Hidden Valley remained their refuge when danger threatened, but increasingly, they found ways to live in both worlds while preserving what mattered most. Years passed. Liliui grew into a strong young woman who combined her mother's wisdom with her stepfather's practicality. Doli developed a gift for healing that honored her grandfather's medicine traditions. And Xavier and Rising Moon defied the odds, their love deepening with each challenge overcome. The medallion remained always at Xavier's throat, no longer needed to guide his heart, but cherished as the first gift from the woman who had become his destiny. In a land and time where such unions were viewed with suspicion or outright hostility, they created something rare and precious, a family bridging two worlds, living proof that love could transcend the artificial boundaries of race and custom. Their reward for courage was a shared life of meaning and purpose, strange perhaps to those who couldn't understand, but beautiful beyond measure to those fortunate enough to witness it.